talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
Hi besties, I am Durita Bashan Lashari with Corevanta. Today we should discuss.
In the glittering heart of Hollywood, where perfection is currency and reputation is everything, no one expected the golden girl of the industry, Blake Lively, to fall this hard, this fast. For years, her image had been sculpted with surgical precision, America's sweetheart, devoted wife, flawless mother, and independent powerhouse who could do no wrong. But beneath that shining exterior, behind the magazine covers and polished red carpet smiles, a darker reality was quietly unfolding, one that would soon tear down everything she had built. When Blake Lively's sealed contract was finally unsealed in court, it didn't just reveal fine print and legal jargon. It exposed manipulation, deception, and a trail of actions that could only be described as a legal orchestration of power. What followed wasn't just a scandal. It was the collapse of a carefully constructed illusion. It all began with whispers, quiet, subtle, the kind of rumors that most publicists bury before breakfast. But these weren't ordinary whispers. They spoke of tampered contracts, forced clauses, and secret settlements between Blake's company and multiple high-profile partners, including producers, sponsors, and even film investors who had begun to question the legitimacy of her business empire. At first, it seemed absurd. Blake Lively, the perfect Hollywood woman, manipulating contracts and intimidating partners? Impossible. But the story gained momentum when one insider leaked an encrypted file to a journalist known for exposing industry corruption. That file contained a series of internal documents labeled confidential, Lively legal holdings, revision drafts. The documents raised more questions than they answered. Why were there multiple contract versions for the same project? Why were signatures mismatched? Why did the timelines not align with official filings? When investigative attorney Brian Friedman and filmmaker Justin Baldoni became directly linked to these inconsistencies, what had been a quiet industry rumor erupted into an all-out media storm. Baldoni's team accused Lively's representatives of altering contractual agreements without consent, violating confidentiality clauses, and even obstructing evidence submission during a prior arbitration. The stakes couldn't have been higher, because if the accusations were true, they didn't just threaten Lively's reputation, they could lead to criminal implications. When the Los Angeles Superior Court ordered the unsealing of Lively's contracts after months of legal back and forth, it felt like time stopped in Hollywood. Suddenly, every entertainment outlet, every blogger, every fan page, everyone wanted to know what those pages contained. For years, the public had seen Blake as the face of grace. Now, those same eyes watched as her empire began to fracture under the weight of truth. The court's reasoning was simple yet damning. The public had a right to transparency in a case that involved professional misconduct and fraudulent documentation. The first revelation came like a thunderclap. Hidden within the contract drafts were unauthorized modifications, small changes at first glance, but monumental in impact. Clauses that once guaranteed creative control to collaborators had been rewritten to grant Lively exclusive post-production influence. Payment schedules were retroactively altered. Profit percentages were silently redirected through shell corporations that traced back to her private LLCs. It was corporate trickery disguised as professional control, and according to experts, these weren't accidental edits. They were intentional manipulations. Inside the courtroom, the air grew heavier with each revelation. Legal analysts covering the trial described the atmosphere as Hollywood's biggest reckoning since the Weinstein cases. Reporters filled the hallway, whispering as if they were watching a dynasty collapse in real time. And sitting in the center of it all was Blake, emotionless motion. Had been a quiet industry rumor erupted into an all-out media storm. Baldoni's team accused Lively's representatives of altering contractual agreements without consent, violating confidentiality clauses, and even obstructing evidence submission during a prior arbitration. The stakes couldn't have been higher, because if the accusations were true, they didn't just threaten Lively's reputation, they could lead to criminal implications. When the Los Angeles Superior Court ordered the unsealing of Lively's contracts after months of legal back and forth, It felt like time stopped in Hollywood. Suddenly, every entertainment outlet, every blogger, every fan page, everyone wanted to know what those pages contained. For years, the public had seen Blake as the face of grace. Now, those same eyes watched as her empire began to fracture under the weight of truth. The court's reasoning was simple yet damning. The public had a right to transparency in a case that involved professional misconduct and fraudulent documentation. The first revelation came like a thunderclap. Hidden within the contract drafts were unauthorized modifications, small changes at first glance, but monumental in impact. Clauses that once guaranteed creative control to collaborators had been rewritten to grant Lively exclusive post-production influence. Payment schedules were retroactively altered. Profit percentages were silently redirected through shell corporations that traced back to her private LLCs. It was corporate trickery disguised as professional control, and according to experts, these weren't accidental edits.
I don't think I
They were
relate to any of
intentional
my
manipulations.
characters. I've played a
Inside the
crack
courtroom,
addict from Boston.
the air grew
I've played an
heavier with
Upper
each
East Side
revelation.
princess.
Legal analysts covering the trial described the atmosphere as Hollywood's biggest reckoning since the Weinstein cases. Reporters filled the hallway, whispering as if they were watching a dynasty collapse in real time. And sitting in the center of it all was Blake, emotionless motion. Her composure cracking behind her carefully constructed mask. Her attorneys fought tooth and nail, arguing that the modifications were industry standard adjustments and that all changes were mutually acknowledged by counsel. But when digital forensics revealed the document timestamps had been altered after the contracts were signed, the room erupted. That single finding transformed the narrative from civil dispute to potential fraud case.
Outside, chaos reigned.
Protesters gathered, some chanting in her defense, others demanding accountability. No one's above the law. One sign read. The media went wild. Networks called it the Lively leak. Tabloids printed phrases like the Queen of Deception, and social media turned into a battlefield of divided loyalty. Fans debated endlessly. Was this the real Blake, or was she being framed by an industry jealous of her success? But as more evidence surfaced, the line between victim and manipulator blurred beyond recognition. One of the most damning pieces of evidence wasn't even a document. It was a recorded meeting transcript recovered from an internal PR consultation. In the audio, a woman's voice, eerily similar to Blake's, can be heard saying, "It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what's believed. If they believe my version, then it is the truth." Those 13 words changed everything. Analysts called it the moment Hollywood's sweetheart turned into its most controversial figure. PR experts began resigning from her campaign overnight. Sponsors like fashion brands and luxury labels quietly paused partnerships pending further review. And just like that, the woman who once owned the public's love found herself abandoned by the same machine she had mastered. Inside the courtroom, Justin Baldoni remained composed, his focus unshakable. He told the court, "This isn't about revenge. It's about integrity." His statement resonated deeply, as his attorneys laid out email trails showing Blake's team pressuring media outlets to retract negative coverage. The image of her as the flawless celebrity disintegrated completely. Screenshots showed phrases like, "ensure narrative alignment" and "schedule positive distraction drops." Translation: manipulate the media. And yet, perhaps the most shocking testimony came from Stephanie Jones, a former communications strategist who had worked closely with Lively's PR team. Under oath, she confessed that the team was instructed to control the narrative by any means necessary. She spoke of pressuring entertainment journalists with access threats, rewording confidential clauses, and reframing ethical boundaries. When asked if Blake herself approved these strategies, Jones hesitated, her voice breaking as she finally said, "Yes." Every major directive came from her directly. The courtroom went silent. That silence felt heavier than any verdict. After that, the case became not just a legal battle. It became a cultural mirror. People began to question the entire celebrity system. How many more contracts were rewritten behind the scenes? How many more perfect images were manufactured through legal manipulation and narrative control? Hollywood was forced to face its ugliest truth, that fame, at its core, is often engineered through deception. As the trial continued, internal memos revealed another layer, a campaign codenamed Project Mirror. It was a confidential PR operation meant to divert media focus from the contract allegations by orchestrating public goodwill moments. Photo shoots, charity posts, viral family clips, all timed around hearings. The exposure of Project Mirror became the nail in the coffin. Even her loyal fans could no longer deny that the illusion was calculated. By the end of the hearings, Blake's world had collapsed. The judge ruled for further forensic investigation into document tampering, and though no criminal charges were immediately filed, the implications were devastating. Her film contracts were suspended, upcoming projects canceled, and every sponsor she had once proudly represented quietly stepped away. Behind closed doors, Hollywood insiders whispered that Blake Lively's name had become radioactive. But there was still one last twist. An internal memo allegedly written by Blake herself, discovered during the evidence audit. It read, "They want me to break, to fall apart in public. But they don't realize I built this world, and I can rebuild it." That line sent shockwaves through the media. Some saw it as defiance, others as delusion. But to those who had watched her rise and fall, it was a haunting reflection of the very system she helped create, one where truth could be edited and control was everything. After the trial ended, Blake vanished from the spotlight. No interviews, no statements, no posts. Her silence was louder than any denial. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's reputation soared. He was hailed as the man who stood against manipulation, the one who dared to fight Hollywood's untouchable elite. But even he admitted in a later interview, winning didn't feel like victory, it felt like surviving the storm. Months later, Hollywood was still reeling from the shock. Studios began implementing stricter transparency protocols. Lawyers started adding new clauses to protect creative partners. And the entertainment press coined a new term, the Lively effect, meaning the irreversible damage caused when the truth behind celebrity control comes to light. For Blake, the once untouchable face of elegance, the legacy she built now carried a shadow. Her fall wasn't just about contracts or lies. It was about the illusion of perfection collapsing in real time. People realized she wasn't just a product of fame, she was its architect, and when her blueprints were exposed, the empire couldn't stand. Years from now, the unsealing of Blake Lively's contract will be remembered as more than a Hollywood scandal. It will stand as a cautionary tale, a reminder that beneath the glitz, beneath the PR gloss and million-dollar smiles, there are secrets written in fine print. And when those secrets are finally unsealed, no amount of beauty, fame, or money can protect you from the truth. Because in Hollywood, the camera can capture perfection, but the contract
When the court
always
adjourned
captures
that
reality.
evening,
The sun outside Los Angeles County Courthouse had already set, but the world inside Blake Lively's mind had gone darker still. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and yet she didn't say a word. The same woman who once ruled red carpets with disarming charm now walked past microphones like a ghost of herself. Pale, robotic, eyes empty of fire. For years, she had played the role of perfection so flawlessly that no one dared question it. But now, with her unsealed contract circulating across media networks and online leaks going viral, perfection was no longer possible. It was over. What had been confined to court filings and sealed folders was now everywhere. Social media was flooded with screenshots of her contract revisions, with influencers dissecting line by line how certain clauses allegedly violated fair practice laws. Fans zoomed in on altered timestamps. Analysts discussed the meaning of post-signature modifications. Words like forgery, fraud, and evidence manipulation became trending hashtags next to her name. Within 48 hours, her once pristine reputation was a battlefield of public outrage. Even her most loyal supporters began asking the one question Blake had feared for years. Was it all fake? Inside her Beverly Hills mansion, her PR team was collapsing. Half the staff had already resigned. The rest were arguing over strategy. One consultant suggested a tearful public apology video. Another demanded she lawyer up and say nothing. But the truth was, Blake's silence wasn't strategic. It was paralyzing. She was frozen between fury and fear, haunted by the knowledge that every lie, every carefully orchestrated illusion, had finally turned against her. Meanwhile, in the public eye, the once untouchable couple of Hollywood, Blake and Ryan Reynolds, faced the kind of scrutiny they'd never imagined. Ryan's absence from court became an obsession for tabloids. Some claimed he had left town to protect his own image. Others whispered about internal marital conflict. Insiders described their home as a fortress of silence, where phone calls went unanswered and even close friends were kept at a distance. For the first time, the world saw cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. But Blake wasn't ready to accept defeat, not yet. In a desperate attempt to regain control, her legal team released a public statement claiming that all allegations of tampering are baseless and that the so-called leaks were digitally manipulated for clout. The problem? Within hours, digital forensic experts publicly debunked it. They confirmed that the unsealed files were authentic, verified by hash matching and timestamp validation. Her denial only deepened her downfall. Behind the scenes, panic set in. Her inner circle, stylists, assistants, producers, began distancing themselves. Brand deals disappeared overnight. A luxury skincare company announced contract termination due to reputational concerns. A streaming giant quietly pulled a film she had produced from its upcoming lineup. Her empire was disintegrating, not because of one mistake, but because the entire structure had been built on control, manipulation, and silence. And then came the leaks. Dozens of private emails and message exchanges between Blake's team and PR strategists began circulating online. These weren't just legal documents. They were glimpses into the machinery of Hollywood's illusion. In one exchange, a senior PR manager wrote, "If this gets out, we pivot the story, make her the victim, always the victim." In another, someone from her legal division said, "Reword clause 7.3. He can't trace it if we frame it as a creative adjustment." Every new leak felt like another piece of her soul being stripped away. By week 3, the court of law had become secondary. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. News anchors dissected her downfall nightly. Influencers compared her to historical Hollywood scandals. Podcasts with millions of listeners dedicated episodes to the lively lie. Even late-night hosts, who once adored her, turned her story into punchlines. But the story wasn't done, because beneath the surface of the courtroom chaos, a second investigation was brewing. The California Legal Oversight Committee quietly launched an inquiry into whether evidence had been deliberately altered. If proven, Blake could face not just reputational damage, but potential criminal liability for document falsification. That single revelation changed the tone of everything. The entertainment world realized this was no longer just gossip. This was law. When the committee's findings leaked, the report stated, "Evidence suggests coordinated modification of legally binding documents within a controlled digital environment. The frequency and timing indicate intentional misrepresentation rather than administrative oversight." Those words echoed through Hollywood like thunder.
Sponsors panicked.
Executives scrambled. Publicists prayed their other clients wouldn't be implicated. The entertainment machine, which had long thrived on secrecy, was now choking on transparency. Meanwhile, Blake's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Insiders described her as unstable, oscillating between rage and despair. One source claimed she would spend nights pacing in her home office, surrounded by shredded papers and half-written statements, muttering that she would rewrite the story before they ruin it. Another said she refused to eat, convinced that someone inside leaked everything. The once unshakable woman was now consumed by paranoia. Ryan, according to multiple insiders, tried to intervene, but the rip felt like another piece of her soul being stripped away. By week 3, the court of law had become secondary. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. News anchors dissected her downfall nightly. Influencers compared her to historical Hollywood scandals. Podcasts with millions of listeners dedicated episodes to The Lively Lie. Even late-night hosts, who once adored her, turned her story into punchlines. But the story wasn't done, because beneath the surface of the courtroom chaos, a second investigation was brewing. The California Legal Oversight Committee quietly launched an inquiry into whether evidence had been deliberately altered. If proven, Blake could face not just reputational damage, but potential criminal liability for document falsification. That single revelation changed the tone of everything. The entertainment world realized this was no longer just gossip. This was law. When the committee's findings leaked, the report stated, "Evidence suggests coordinated modification of legally binding documents within a controlled digital environment. The frequency and timing indicate intentional misrepresentation rather than administrative oversight." Those words echoed through Hollywood like thunder.
Sponsors panicked.
Executives scrambled. Publicists prayed their other clients wouldn't be implicated. The entertainment machine, which had long thrived on secrecy, was now choking on transparency. Meanwhile, Blake's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Insiders described her as unstable, oscillating between rage and despair. One source claimed she would spend nights pacing in her home office, surrounded by shredded papers and half-written statements, muttering that she would rewrite the story before they ruin it. Another said she refused to eat, convinced that someone inside leaked everything. The once unshakable woman was now consumed by paranoia. Ryan, according to multiple insiders, tried to intervene, but the rift between them had become too wide. The man once known for defending her publicly now avoided all comment. Some suggested he had seen the documents himself and realized that defending her would destroy them both. His silence became symbolic, not of loyalty, but of self-preservation. As the trial neared its final week, Justin Baldoni's team presented what many would later call the moment that ended her career. A recovered draft contract, stored on a cloud backup, clearly showed two different versions of the same signature, one authentic, one copied digitally. The forensic expert demonstrated on-screen how the duplicate was traced and overlaid using editing software. The contrast was undeniable. Gasps filled the room. Even the judge appeared visibly disturbed. Blake's attorney stood to object, but was immediately overruled. The visual proof was too overwhelming. The prosecution rested its case. Outside, the world erupted once again. Hashtags like #LivelySignature and #ContractFraud trended globally. YouTubers, lawyers, and journalists from around the world analyzed frame by frame of the leaked presentation. Hollywood had never seen anything like it. This wasn't just a fall from grace. It was the total annihilation of a brand, a legacy, and a person who had once seemed invincible. When the verdict finally came, it wasn't a conviction, but it was a moral execution. The judge announced that Blake Lively's contracts were to be subject to continued forensic supervision and that civil penalties for breach of good faith negotiations would follow. Though she avoided criminal sentencing, the damage was irreversible. Her company, her brand, and her credibility were gone. As the courtroom emptied, Blake sat still for a long time. Cameras waited outside, but she never came out. When she finally did, she didn't speak. Her expression said it all. The Queen of Hollywood had fallen, not by scandalous rumor, but by her own signature. In the weeks that followed, Hollywood insiders coined a chilling phrase, the Lively effect. It became shorthand for the moment when a celebrity's obsession with control finally exposes the truth they feared most. Brands cited it in internal training. Studios rewrote their PR ethics policies. And across the industry, quiet panic spread, because if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. Justin Baldoni, meanwhile, refused to celebrate. In his first interview after the ruling, he said, "There are no winners here, just truth, and truth always comes with a cost." Those words went viral, poetic, tragic, and true. Months later, Blake Lively vanished. No red carpets, no social media, no public appearances. Insiders whispered about her living quietly overseas, rebuilding her life away from the cameras. Others claimed she was writing a memoir, her final defense. But one thing was certain, Hollywood would never be the same. The mask had been lifted, the script rewritten, and the industry exposed for what it really was, a beautiful illusion held together by contracts, lies, and fear. Because in the end, when the truth is unsealed, no amount of fame can hide the signatures that expose you. The weeks after the verdict felt like an earthquake that never stopped trembling beneath Hollywood's polished surface. The city looked the same from the outside, palm trees, billboards, awards season chatter. But something underneath had cracked forever. Blake Lively, once the golden girl of American cinema, was gone.
No posts, no interviews, no paparazzi seguetings.
Her social media accounts were deactivated, her publicist terminated, and her company's website displayed a blank page reading only, under revision. It was the kind of silence that terrified even those who once envied her. Because in Hollywood, silence isn't peace, it's punishment. Inside the industry, conversations turned whispery, secretive. Executives who had once fought for her attention now avoided her name like a curse. Studio heads restructured their partnerships, removing her production label from upcoming credits. Editors began quietly erasing her from promotional materials, pretending she had never been attached. It was as though Hollywood itself had decided to delete her existence. But behind closed doors, people still asked the same question. Who leaked it all? For months, speculation centered around Justin Baldoni. Some called him the whistleblower. Others painted him as the villain who destroyed her career out of revenge. But the truth was more complicated. In confidential circles, word spread that the real leak came from someone within Blake's own camp, a disillusioned insider who had seen too much and decided to let the world know. The name Stephanie Jones began circulating in backroom discussions, a former assistant who had allegedly turned over encrypted files to investigators. When reporters asked her about it, she neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. Her silence said more than words ever could. Meanwhile, Ryan Reynolds' quietness had become. Blake was rebuilding, quietly, methodically, with a new circle of advisors. She had fired her American legal team and hired a European crisis management firm known for its reputation resurrection programs. They specialized in transforming scandals into second acts. And Blake, broken as she was, wanted her redemption story written before Hollywood erased her completely. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni was facing his own storm. Though he had emerged vindicated, Hollywood doesn't reward those who expose its secrets. Studio offers began drying up. His new projects were suddenly postponed. PR insiders admitted privately that many executives considered him a liability, not because he lied, but because he told the truth. He started receiving veiled warnings disguised as friendly advice. Lay low for a while, Justin. Let the dust settle. But the dust wasn't settling. It was thickening into smoke. In an exclusive podcast interview months later, Justin finally broke his silence. Calm, composed, but weary, he said, when power meets accountability, someone always bleeds. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted fairness. But in this town, fairness feels like treason. The quote spread like wildfire, inspiring some, enraging others. Commentators called it Hollywood's new creed. But for Blake, it was salt in an open wound. She listened to that interview from her rented Paris apartment and reportedly smashed a glass in anger. In her mind, Justin hadn't just taken her career, he had taken her narrative. By the time summer arrived, the industry had moved on, but the scars remained. A new generation of actresses began distancing themselves from the Blake Lively mold. Perfection, PR control, curated feminism. Instead, authenticity became the new currency. Ironically, Blake's fall had created a cultural reset she never intended. But redemption, as always in Hollywood, came with a price tag. Behind the scenes, Blake's European team launched Operation Restoration. It began with strategic charity donations, anonymous op-eds about forgiveness and fame, and rumors of a secret documentary project titled Unfiltered, The Truth Behind the Lies. She wanted to turn the story around, not as the villain, but as the misunderstood woman crushed by the system she once fed. Her lawyers began drafting new statements claiming that much of the evidence had been illegally obtained. She wasn't denying everything, just reframing it. And slowly, it began to work. Certain outlets, especially in Europe, started softening their tone. But in America, the backlash never truly faded. Late-night hosts continued making jokes. Memes resurfaced. Hashtags like #LivelyLie and #JusticeForJustin still trended whenever her name appeared. The damage had gone too deep to repair fully. Hollywood has a short memory for love, but a long one for humiliation. And then came the documentary leak. In late August, a 27-minute rough cut of her supposed unfiltered film surfaced online, uploaded anonymously before her team could stop it. The footage was haunting. Dim lighting, long pauses, and a visibly broken Blake speaking about how fame becomes a cage. But what shocked viewers most was the line she whispered near the end. "I didn't lie. I just survived." That sentence ignited an inferno of debate. Was she confessing? Was she deflecting? Analysts called it the most haunting moment of Hollywood's modern era. The leak became one of the most viewed videos in YouTube history. And for the first time since the scandal began, public opinion began to fracture. Some fans, especially those drawn to redemption narratives, started sympathizing with her again. Others saw it as manipulation, another performance in her lifelong script of control. In September, Ryan Reynolds was photographed leaving a meeting with divorce attorneys. Neither confirmed anything, but insiders claimed papers had already been filed quietly. Hollywood's once dream couple was no more. Their story, once the symbol of love and laughter, had become a silent battlefield. Sources close to Ryan said he wanted peace for the kids, while Blake's circle insisted she was fighting for her legacy. It wasn't just a divorce. It was the final collapse of her empire. Meanwhile, Friedman resurfaced with a cryptic interview of his own, stating, "Hollywood doesn't punish the guilty. It punishes the exposed." It was widely interpreted as a reference to Blake, but also indirectly to himself. His words underlined a brutal truth. Everyone who had touched that case came out scarred. By October, Hollywood had entered a new phase, one of quiet fear. Studios started requiring full digital transparency logs for contract edits. PR agencies added ethics clauses. Journalists began investigating old deals. The lively effect, once just a term, had become industry law. Her downfall had rewritten the rules. But even as her legacy burned, rumors persisted that Blake wasn't done. A cryptic social media account began posting mysterious messages in her old aesthetic, golden filters, poetic captions, and veiled references to the truth still hidden. Fans speculated it was her comeback campaign. Others believed it was someone trying to bait her. Either way, the world was watching again. And then the bombshell. A major investigative journalist dropped a report claiming there was another set of contracts yet to be reviewed, ones that involved not just Blake, but multiple A-list collaborators, high-ranking agents, and executives. According to the source, those documents contained evidence of coordinated manipulation across multiple productions. If true, it would mean Blake wasn't alone. She was part of a much bigger system of deception. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. What if Blake wasn't the architect, but the pawn? In a strange twist, sympathy began creeping back into the conversation. Commentators who had once condemned her now described her as Hollywood's scapegoat. Documentaries, think pieces, and podcasts began re-examining her case not as an isolated scandal, but as a symptom of systemic corruption. Maybe Blake's sin, one journalist said, was playing the game too well until she became its cautionary tale. For months, she stayed silent. Then, on New Year's Eve, a verified message appeared on her old social account, reading simply, "You thought you knew my story. Wait for the real one." Within minutes, it went viral. Millions of comments flooded in, shock, anger, curiosity. Hollywood froze. Was she coming back? Was she going to expose everyone else? Or was it just another illusion? No one knew. But one thing was certain. Blake Lively, the woman Hollywood tried to bury, was not finished yet. Because in this town, the only thing more powerful than truth is the person who controls its timing. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't Hollywood writing her story. It was Blake. In the dead silence of a city built on noise, the lights of Hollywood burned lower than ever before. The name Aria Monroe, once written across every billboard and magazine cover, now hung like an echo nobody dared to speak. Months had passed since the courtroom revelations, since her carefully polished world crumbled under the weight of her own contracts, her own secrets. But even as her empire turned to dust, one thing still remained: the truth she hadn't yet told. And that truth was about to consume her entirely. Aria had vanished from the public eye, retreating into the shadows of a half-forgotten mansion in Laurel Canyon. Her days passed between stacks of legal papers, cigarette smoke, and the faint hum of a single lamp that never turned off. The people who once called her Queen now called her Ghost. But while the world forgot her name, Aria was planning her last move. Not a comeback, not redemption, but exposure. A truth so brutal it would destroy her and the system that created her. In her silence, she had collected everything: encrypted emails, recorded conversations, unedited contracts, old footage from private meetings, every shred of evidence proving how deep the corruption ran, not just in her case, but across the entire industry. What had begun as her personal downfall had become a map of systemic deceit: falsified royalties, falsified signatures, publicist-driven manipulation, and a silent network of men who bought and sold reputations like stocks. She wasn't going to run anymore. She was going to make them all watch her burn. With the help of one last ally, Damian Wells, the director who had once been her rival, Aria began filming a documentary in secret, simply titled The Reckoning. Damian was hesitant at first, knowing what it could cost them both, but when he read the files she had gathered, he understood. "If you show this," he told her quietly, "you'll never work again." She looked up from her laptop, her eyes hollow but determined. "I already don't." For months, they filmed in dimly lit rooms, her confessions spoken like a prayer into a microphone. There were no scripts, no stylists, no makeup artists. Just Aria, stripped of glamour, stripped of control, bleeding truth into every frame. The footage was raw, sometimes incoherent, sometimes heartbreaking. "They called me a liar," she said in one scene, staring into the lens. "But every lie I told was the truth they wrote for me." As editing began, the walls started closing in. Anonymous calls, threatening letters, hacked servers. Someone didn't want the reckoning to see daylight. Damian's studio was broken into. Hard drives disappeared. Then, a week later, he was found unconscious in his apartment. Overdose, the paper said. But Aria knew better. "They're not going to stop," she whispered to herself as she watched the news. "So neither will I." That night, she finished the film alone. She didn't edit out the pain. She left every tear, every silence, every contradiction intact, because that was the truth. When she was done, she uploaded the entire film onto a decentralized server, beyond the reach of the studios. She scheduled its release for midnight, New Year's Eve, the same day she had once been crowned Hollywood's brightest star. The world wasn't ready for what followed. When The Reckoning went live, the internet exploded. It wasn't just a documentary, it was a confession wrapped in an indictment. It exposed the manipulation of awards, the silencing of whistleblowers, the laundering of image contracts, and how media outlets were paid to rewrite public opinion. Names appeared on screen, not real ones, but enough for everyone in the industry to know exactly who she meant. Each revelation struck like a bullet. Viewers sat frozen as Aria said, "They built me to be perfect so they could break me when I wasn't." The film ended not with a speech, but with a question. If the truth destroys me, was it ever mine to keep? By morning, the system was in chaos. Lawsuits filed overnight. PR agencies shut down. Executives resigned. Stock values for major entertainment firms dropped within hours. Some called it a revolution. Others called it career suicide. Aria didn't appear on social media. She didn't answer calls. She didn't even watch the aftermath. Her job was done. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to perform. She had given the truth back to the world, and the world had no idea what to do with it. 3 days later, police found her body in her Laurel Canyon home. No signs of struggle. A single note on her desk, written in black ink. The truth doesn't set you free. It just shows the cage. The discovery sent shockwaves across the planet. Some believed she had been silenced. Others said she had chosen peace on her own terms. Either way, Aria Monroe was gone, leaving behind a trail of footage, files, and a legacy too heavy to bury. Her documentary was banned in several countries, but kept resurfacing under different names. The Price of Perfection, The Actress Who Knew Too Much, The Fall of Aria. Each re-upload became an act of rebellion. Months later, Damien's unfinished notes were leaked, revealing that he had helped Aria record a final hidden segment, one that never made it into the released version. In that lost scene, she stood by a window at dawn and said, "I used to think I wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness is just another lie. What I want now is silence, not theirs, mine." That single clip became iconic. Artists painted murals. Journalists debated whether she was a martyr or a manipulator. And slowly, the mythology of Aria Monroe replaced the scandal. She became both saint and sinner, a mirror for every person who had ever been swallowed by fame. But her film changed Hollywood forever. Investigations reopened. A new wave of transparency laws were enacted for contract editing and media manipulation. The old guard of producers vanished into obscurity. And for the first time in decades, the public began to question not just the stars they worshipped, but the system that created them. Every award show, every press conference, every exclusive interview carried the shadow of Aria's words. Her ghost lived in the pauses between fake smiles. Her truth haunted every new actress who signed her first contract, wondering if the paper she was signing was her beginning or her end. A year later, on the anniversary of the reckoning, a mysterious encrypted message appeared online from an unknown account linked to Aria's old email. It read, "The story never ends. Only the storytellers do." Within hours, her documentary reappeared on every major streaming platform simultaneously, glitching its way through the algorithms that once erased her. Whether it was her, Damien's backup, or someone else avenging her, no one could tell. But it didn't matter. The message was clear. They could kill the actress, but not the truth. And so, in the end, Aria Monroe didn't die as a scandal. She died as a symbol of what happens when a human being is turned into a brand and then destroyed for daring to rewrite her own script. Hollywood buried her body, but not her story. Her name became a whispered warning among new actors and producers alike. Don't become another Aria. Yet even that warning carried irony, because without her, there would be no new rules, no awareness, no reckoning. Her tragedy became the very revolution she never lived to see. And the final frame of the leaked director's cut. There is no dialogue, no music, just Aria standing in the middle of a dark studio, surrounded by shattered mirrors. One by one, she turns them toward the camera, each reflection showing a different face. Executives, fans, journalists, lawyers, herself. And then she says softly, "You wanted the truth? Here we all are." The screen fades to black. For some, her ending was madness. For others, it was justice. But for Hollywood, it was prophecy. Because after Aria Monroe, no one could ever again pretend that fame was innocent. Her fall wasn't just the destruction of a star, it was the collapse of an empire built on illusion. And as the world moved on, pretending to heal, one truth remained unshaken. Behind every spotlight, there is always a shadow waiting for its...
Thanks for watching. Subscribe my channel Corevanta for more updates. With Sardar Zuriat Abbas Khan Mashari.